Hey guys, so I was requested to do some more examples of just the straight up quotient rule for derivatives. So in this video, I'm going to go through these three, and these are just straight basic quotient rules. So if you're struggling with a little bit, this might be a really good video to watch. Okay, so just as a reminder, this is the quotient rule. So if you don't have this memorized, this is usually a thing you've got to have memorized. Pause the video if you need to write it down. And I'm just going to jump right into it. So starting here with A, so to take the derivative, so as I kind of remind myself, I'm going to go ahead and just write out kind of the general format of the derivative. So I'm going to note that this is the f of x in my formula, and this is the g of x in my formula. Now don't confuse that with, the derivative that I'm taking over here, but I do just want to kind of restate the quotient rule. And you might find when you're first kind of getting this down that you might have to write this down a few times to wrap your head around it. So I'm going to go ahead and just write it out so that we have a framework like this. And okay, so now all of this over g of x squared. Okay, so here's my f of x in this formula. Here's my g of x in this formula. So as I follow along here and take the derivative, so first I leave the bottom function alone. Now I'm going to write this as x to the 1/2 just because I don't really like having radicals when I'm taking derivatives. And then I'm going to multiply that by the derivative of f prime of x. So the derivative of sine of x is cosine of x. Okay, so there's the first part. So now this says to leave f of x alone. So here's my sine of x. Sine of x, so don't do anything to that. And now I take the derivative of this guy here, which we know is also x to the 1/2. So now I can just use the power rule. So this is going to be 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. And then, now that I've got all those pieces, I'm going to take the denominator and I'm going to square it. So let me make some space. And so from here now you just kind of simplify as far as you can, and that can kind of be open to interpretation. So for instance, in this case, so you'll notice that, so this part here is fine, but when I get to this part, so I've got this negative exponent here. So how do we deal with that? There's a lot of different ways that you can deal with that. So the way that I'm going to deal with this actually is I'm going to break this up into two separate pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and take this part and so the square root of x squared is just going to be x. So I'll break up the first fraction and then I'll have the second fraction. So now I'll call this sine of x over 2. So now this x to the 1/2 comes to the bottom, and then that's going to all be times x. So now I can kind of see that I can simplify a little bit farther. So here I can simplify the exponents. Here, x to the 1/2 and the x, I can simplify that. So I'll make a little more space again. And so now I have f prime of x equals cosine of x over x to the 1/2 minus sine of x over 2x to the 3/2. And so now if you wanted to go farther with this, like a lot of different books will take this a lot of different ways. So you could get a common denominator again, and then get everything over the same denominator of 2x to the 3/2. Or you could just leave it here. So it kind of just depends from here, but this is probably a good spot to kind of leave you. If you have questions, you can always leave them in the comments and I read them all over. Okay, so now moving on to B here. So I'm not going to write down the definition this time, so hopefully you've already written it down. If not, go ahead and pause it and then hit play. And if you are trying to master this, I would highly recommend actually pausing here and giving this a try before you watch me do it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go through this now. So I know that I leave the bottom function alone, so I'm just going to rewrite it out, and this is going to get kind of big this time. And now I'm going to take the derivative of the top function, and so just to maybe be clear, this is going to be my f of x, this is going to be my g of x. Okay, so if I take the derivative, this is negative 9 sine of x minus 2 secant squared x. And now here's always the big problem. You probably even have this issue on your paper from time to time, like you start to run out of room. So I usually like to indent so that I know to bring it to the next line. Actually, a lot of times when I was doing calc homework, I would write like problems like this in like landscape mode, or I'd flip the paper so I could actually fit everything. Okay, so anyways, so now I'm going to leave the top function alone, and then I'll take the derivative of the bottom. So let's see if I think I'm going to run out of space too there. So now I'll go ahead and multiply that by the derivative of the bottom. So the derivative of e to the x is e to the x. The derivative of x to the 1/3 is 1/3 x to the negative 2/3, and then this is minus 8 cosine of x. So now you've got this big old mess, and then all of that is over the denominator. So this is just kind of a thing that happens sometimes. So it's a little bit hard since I have this really confined space when I do these videos, but it can also be hard when you have paper. So you kind of have to just learn to write a little bit smaller. So there's the whole structure of this derivative. Now, as far as where you actually go from here, I personally feel like if you have these kind of pieces here, in a lot of cases, like if you're in my class, I might tell you like you don't have to simplify any farther. But sometimes you might actually have to go through and kind of FOIL all of these pieces out. Now, in this particular one, I don't have this set up in a specific way so that it's going to work out cleverly, but sometimes when you're being told to simplify all the way, you'll have things that work out a little bit more cleverly. If you want to see an example like that, you can let me know and I can try to come up with some. But in this video, I'm just trying to talk about the basic structure of the quotient rule. So I'm going to move on to C now and just do the same thing. So again, just setting up the structure. And again, this might be a really great place for you to pause just to make sure you've got the idea if that's why you're watching this video. So I leave the bottom function alone, and then I take the derivative of the top function. So this will be 35 x to the 6 minus 12x squared plus 3. So that's the first part of the derivative. Now I have to subtract off. So I leave the top function alone, and then I take the derivative of the bottom function. Oops, and I almost lost that x. So this times cosine of x minus 3/4 x to the negative 1/4. And then once again, it's going to be all of that over sine of x minus x to the 3/4 squared. So if you got kind of that part, you got the general structure of it, and then the rest of this would just be kind of algebra. So again, I'm trying to keep this as a little bit of a shorter video, so I wanted to get through a bunch of different examples, but if you do want me to go through some with more algebra, leave me a comment. I'll come up with something and I'll make that for you guys. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you later.